Well, hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff, and I don't know, some of you may be happy, unhappy, who knows, that I'm not joined by Jared Nelson or Scott Edberg, but today we've got some extra guests with us that we're excited to get to know. You may know we're in the middle of our series that we've been calling a Some Assembly Required. We're walking through the General Assembly schedule in order to give just an impression of the week, to give a sense of it to any newcomers, maybe to refresh some of you veterans who've been coming around. But I guarantee that today is going to give everyone new material on General Assembly. These are things you've never heard before. This is a perspective that we've never really thought about. We've made it all the way through the docket, though. We've discussed committee meetings and floor reports, the Overtures Committee. We've done some very, very deep dives on RPR and NOMCOM that, you know, all three of you out there will have listened to. But the question that we're discussing today is, what about all the other people that are wandering around at the convention property? There's not only commissioners that you're going to see in Richmond in June, but there's other people that are going to be there. And that's who we want to talk to and about today. So to help us in that discussion, I'm happy to welcome two new guests to the show, Sarah Morse and Zoe Miller. Welcome. We're glad y'all are with us. Happy to have y'all. I would have you sort of briefly introduce yourself, but our first item of discussion is for you to introduce yourselves a little bit more, maybe at length. So one of y'all can start. Who are you? Where do you come from? What are you doing? Tell us about your families. How'd you become a Presbyterian?
Well, I am Sean Morris's wife. So that's how I've been introduced to the last, every single General Assembly I've been to. It's been like, oh, you're Sean's wife. Like, yeah, that's my first name. So anyway, we've been married for about 13 years. We've got 4 kids. And Sean is an associate pastor here in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is a little bit outside of Knoxville. And we've been here for about 2 years. We were in Roanoke, Virginia for almost 8. But yeah, that's who we are. That's who my husband is. And I think I've been to just about every General Assembly since Chattanooga back in 2015.
Are you Presbyterian just because your husband is, or
absolutely
how'd that work?
not. No, I was drug kicking and screaming into Presbyterianism back in college. I was raised somewhat Baptist-y, Big Eva, mix of all sorts of wild rural stuff, and came to Grove City College, and all of my friends were in this OPC Bible study, and I just went along with them, and I was like, what's a Presbyterian? I have no idea. And so I ran into a lot of very, very rigid people, a little bit of hyper Calvinism. And it was the first time, ever interacting with ideas like regulative principle of worship, predestination, election, Reformed. I'd never heard Reformed being used outside of sending your kid to a Reform school to cure their behavior. I was like, Reformed Presbyterian, who are these people? But I would read lots of the different things that they would tell me, and I would go back to my dorm room and I would read, and I would be like, oh, they're kind of grumpy, but they're right. This is exactly what I see in the scriptures. And so, I mean, it took me a good, 3 years. By my junior year, I would say I was Presbyterian, definitely Reformed. John Piper was kind of the gateway drug. And then from there on, a little bit of a lot of other different things. But yeah, so by the time I met Sean, I was already Reformed, mostly Presbyterian, except for infant baptism. And he had it easy. So I was already there. He did not have to do the work. But yeah, that's what I was like.
Of the friends that I have that do not come from Presbyterian backgrounds and marry into Presbyterian families, infant baptism is the one thing across the board that's like the hardest thing for them to think about. But it's usually like a pretty short gateway. It's difficult to be convinced on. I have the luxury of never having held a different opinion. My gateway drug into Presbyterianism was being baptized into a Presbyterian church. So I was actually baptized in the RCUS. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think Dr. Dominic Aquila is the one who performed the baptism. So my legacy was really kind of set out for me in ways that I did not have any comprehension of like 4 years ago. So I'm Zoe Miller. My husband is Seth Miller. If you've been to Twin Lakes Fellowship, you might have seen him this year. We are in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, at a church plant. And I was not a nerdy Presbyterian up until about 2020. And that's when I started listening to Presbycast and got really into polity and very nerdy. And I
COVID
met.
did really weird things to some people. Just
Mhm.
saying.
So true.
Hey, at least I became less extreme during COVID instead of more. I mean, I was on a really interesting path in my mind. I was thinking, okay, I was looking at the degradation of the American church and being like a, 18-year-old. I was just really just radical. I was like, what are we going to do about this? This is horrible. Like we need to flip society on its head. I don't know about theonomy. Maybe that'll work. And then listening to Presbycast just put me on a course for confessionalism that I think is really, really good and a lot healthier than some of the philosophies that I was looking into. So, yeah, Seth and I got married in March of last year. The Lord has not blessed us with kids yet, but we have about 8,000 potential names that we could use for our kids once they do come along. So that'll be like the biggest struggle is picking one of them. But yeah, and to answer the most important question that we're here to answer today, does polity matter? The answer is yes. And I think it can matter to you, and it's okay if it matters to you, even if you can't vote on it. So, yeah.
Ooh,
Amen.
I like that. You said you turned away from theonomy at a point, but you also just moved to Idaho. So holding these two things,
Hey.
Just saying.
We live in Coeur d'Alene. That is a little bit further north than where you might be thinking of.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I cannot confirm or deny anything there.
Yeah. I appreciate that thought that polity does matter to folks that even can't, I guess, technically vote on it. Although we can make a strong argument that we are actually a bottom up denomination. What's the phrase everybody loves to say? Grassroots, even though we don't look like it all the time. Y'all get
Secretly
votes.
grassroots.
Secretly grassroots. Yeah.
We're grassroots
forgetfully
until
grassroots. Yeah.
Until the will of the body does something that I don't like. We are a grassroots denomination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what anonymous Twitter accounts are for. So
Oh.
yeah. Folks are probably surprised that we have an episode like this, but we really do want to think about it. And what brought it to my mind was my wife. My wife's been to GA before. She didn't come last year because we had just had our fourth daughter. And so she was tending to her, but she's going to come this year. We're going to fly out to Richmond and we're excited for that. And we started talking about what she was going to do. And some of the wives of our ruling elders who she's close with are going to come along. And it occurred to me, well, there's a lot more that goes on at GA and a lot more that probably needs to be talked about related to GA for, elders that may listen to this show that are going to GA, but then even just families in general, is it worth going to General Assembly with your elder husband or father or friend or whoever he may be? And so that's kind of what we want to get into today. You all have been to General Assembly before. I'm curious, when was the first time you went to GA and what got you there?
The first GA I went to was in Chattanooga in 2015. And obviously I went just because Sean he had just been ordained the month before. And I was pregnant with our first. So I remember hiking around Chattanooga in the middle of June, sweating like crazy, 5 months pregnant. But I just went because I'm like, well, I can. There's no reason I shouldn't. And it was how to put this? It was a bit jolting. I think depending on the church that you come from or the area of the country you come from, if you've been rather sheltered from what's going on at sort of other levels, you haven't maybe been to any presbytery meetings, you've never been to GA, you only know your church. Going to something like General Assembly as a non-voting member opens your eyes to a lot of stuff. And some of it is good and some of it is bad, but I think it's good to get your bubble challenged. It's good to know what's going on, and it was jolting. You see a lot of performative speakers at the mic. You get used to trying to figure out, okay, so and so said this, And when he said this, he actually meant this other thing. You know, it was kind of code speak for this other thing that's being referenced that I have no idea. So for the first like 2, 3, 4 years, I would be in different message groups with my husband or one of my friends and be like, what are they talking about? What is this? What does he mean by this? Why are we going back around and we're asking the same? Why are we asking the same questions? Why is everybody answering? You know, I loved, what was it, Roy Taylor? You know, not everybody has had the chance to say this a different way.
There's so much inside baseball.
Yes, there's a lot of inside baseball, which again, some of it's just learning the ropes. Some of it is kind of bad. Some of it's good. But everything
has been said, but not everybody's had a chance to say it.
That was the quote. That was pretty funny.
Incidentally, that is also the motto of our podcast. So
that's the motto of every podcast. Are you kidding me?
That's the motto of my life, actually. I've already said this thing, but have I said it another way? My husband would agree with me there.
I'll kick it over to you, Zoe. What was your first one?
So, ironically, the insider baseball is really what got me to GA the first time. My first GA was in 2021 because they didn't have it in 2020. And so yeah, the first GA was in 2021. I went with my dad because over the summer of 2020, as I mentioned, I started really getting into Presbycast, and they were discussing a lot of issues that were sort of going under the surface of the PCA. I learned about the distinction between the more confessional wing, and then there's like the more progressive wing, mostly with regard to social politics. I know that's what they were saying in 2020. It's probably changed somewhat since then. So disclaimer, of course. And then, of course, like the moderate middle who, you know, would be listening to different arguments and potentially be persuaded by stuff that goes on the floor or whatever. And so I was listening to a lot of the lead up, which was related to Revoice. And so I knew that was going to be a big issue, and I kind of expected certain speakers to come up. And so I was really interested in everything that was going on, like the polity. I was like, wait, we have agencies and they're not really beholden to the General Assembly, even though they're supposed to be, and like, what is going on? So I went in 2021. I asked my dad if I could go to General Assembly with him in St. Louis, and he was like, what? My dad is a PCA teaching elder who is serving out of bounds at African Bible University in Uganda. And so this was his first GA in like 10 years as well. And so as I am stumbling across some of the issues, I'm sharing them with him, and he is like, wait, hold on a second, what's going on? And so it was really fun. They had a small number of floor clerks that were there that year, and they really needed a lot of them. And so my dad volunteered me to be a floor clerk, and I wasn't sure if it was permissible or not. You know, am I allowed to be here? And so I met the Tom Stein and Rick. Oh my goodness.
Springer. Rick Springer.
Rick Springer. They are the nicest guys. And they were like, no, you don't have to be male in order to hand out papers to people on the floor. We're happy to have you. And so that is what I did. I handed out business, and I got to keep copies for myself. And I think I still have some paper copies. So that is pretty much what got me to General Assembly, is some of the political things that were going on. And I went back again in 22 because I continue to be interested. An interesting fellow by the name of Brad Isbell introduced me to Sarah, and he said, you guys should have a podcast together. And so I've continued to be involved in polity stuff just from an observer perspective. And then the second time I went to GA was the normal reasons. And then I met my husband for the very first time at General Assembly. So that was pretty cool too. In person, I mean, we'd have been talking online, but yeah, that's a too long overview of the reasons that got me to General Assembly in the first place.
No, it's great. It's good. I can't remember when it was, because you were a floor clerk over on the side that I normally sit on. There's a hand. Me and my pastor's cohort sit on the right side usually, if you're facing the stage.
Might remember that.
I think you were over there, and I remember thinking, why is there a girl? Is this allowed? This can't be right. This is very weird. But it was obviously not a big deal for a lady to hand out paper, as you so aptly put it. I was
I was kind of like nervous. I was like, should I even be doing this? I'm like, what does this say to the commissioners, you know? And I remember I was in the informational meeting and I sat next to a ruling elder named Gabe Williams, who you might know
Oh
from social
man.
media.
Oh man.
I
Gabe
love
Williams.
Gabe. He is great. And he was sitting next to me and he was like, so what brings you to General Assembly? Because I'm like a single 19-year-old college student. Um, and he was like, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, I came because I'm really interested in like the denominational back and forth. And he was like really nervous. He was like, what? Because, you know, sometimes you have non-voting members who want to influence polity in ways that do not comport with it, to put it in a as vaguely as possible to still be like useful. But then I told him I'd been listening to Presbycast and he was like, you know, he's here, right? And I was like, who's here? And he was like,
Zoe's
Brad
hero.
Isbell. Brad Isbell, my hero at the time. No, I'm just kidding. I still love him. Um, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's Brad Isbell. I can't believe he's here. And Gabriel was like, do you want me to introduce you to him? And I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can meet Brad. And so Brad invited me to the More in the PCA party on Wednesday night. And that's where I met Sarah for the first time. So it was great.
Oh, never meet your heroes. Am I right? I mean,
No kidding. No
been
kidding. He's going to
downhill
be
ever since then,
so
I'm
embarrassed
sure.
listening to this.
I appreciate the notion that Brad listens to Polity Matters, or maybe because y'all are on, Brad's going to listen to Polity Matters.
Probably because we're on, he won't. Honestly.
Yeah.
Ooh,
I was
that's
about
good.
to
That's good.
say.
Well,
I like
see,
that.
he's at my church, so he listens to enough of my constant commentary on everything. He's probably like, "Oh, look, Sarah's talking again. Holy cow! Why did somebody record her? Why did I ever give her a podcast?" But yeah, one thing that I thought was really interesting, something that Zoe said about, you know, non-voting members trying to influence things in different ways. I think it's really good for wives to go and for other people to go if they can, wives especially, because you get to see what your husband and what everybody else is doing. And if you go more than once, which I highly recommend, if you're going to go, you go more than once, because if you go the first time and you're really frustrated by an issue, no matter which side you're on, or I mean, there's multiple different sides, you know, wherever you fall in the parameter of super conservative or really progressive, you know, or somewhere in the middle, there's always going to be one or two issues that are just really frustrating. And, you know, it may come out the way that you want it to in the end. You know, the vote may end up your way, but the process is just, oh my gosh, what are we doing? And it's really good to watch that happen and cool your jets. Because I remember my first one, and it might have been the fact that I was pregnant, but I've been pregnant every other GA. And so I'm kind of always pregnant and angsty and hungry and just sitting there, you know, having a moment and being frustrated. But I was just, there was a few things going on that were just over the top ridiculous. And I thought, this is what we're doing. This is what the guys are doing. And this is frustrating. And this is frustrating. And this is frustrating. And you just kind of wanted to throw your hands up in the air and go, ugh, whatever. And then you came back and you watch it the second year and you watch it the third year and you kind of understand more of what's going on. You understand more of what the subcommittees are doing and how long everything takes and how much everything is looked at before it even gets to General Assembly. And you start to develop a, parameter for the slowness of it. And sometimes the slowness is careful and good and methodical. There are still some areas where I'm not convinced the slowness is helpful, but you know,
Pros and cons.
this is a human process, and therefore there are going to be issues. But you start to develop a respect for, one, the process, and two, the people who work really hard behind the scenes to influence the process. And you learn not to get quite so worked up over things, and more so, okay, I know why this happened. I know why this went this way. I know why so-and-so, you know, I know so-and-so now. So now that I know this person, I know why they got so worked up at the mic over this. And I know this person is from this church, and that's why he's talking about this. And so you develop, maybe this is shocking for, us Reformed Presbyterians, because we can be a little stodgy sometimes, but, you develop human relationships with other people who are across party lines, and you realize, okay, they're voting this way because of this. And I understand that. And I may not agree with them, but I can still respect them, and I can respectfully disagree, and I understand where they're coming from. And more of that needs to develop in our denomination, not just among elders' wives, although it is helpful when you're supporting your husband to be behind the scenes and see that, or to be a church member and see that. But, I think the same battles are the battles that young ministers fight directly after ordination, and they start coming either as interns or young guys. And it's just like, we're it's the battle of Helm's Deep at every single issue. And, for all of us, it just, we need to be settled and tamed a little bit. For those of us who share my personality type, which is Irish and German and Scottish and Czech, and basically angry in every single ethnicity, we need that calmness and patience to be developed. And watching it over several different years has been helpful for me for that reason.
Well, I'm German, so all I can say on that is don't tell me that I'm wrong about a polity thing that I have an opinion on. And if you tell me that, I will just not listen to you. But yeah, Sarah's right. If you want to go, you should go more than once, especially because the first time that I went to GA, even having been really interested in the issues beforehand, it still feels like you are drinking from a fire hose, especially with like Robert's rules. Even if you know what they are, you don't always know what the rules are. And then, of course, you will be confused when they inevitably do. Are we voting on the motion or the amendment to the motion or the substitute motion or the amendment to the substitute motion? Or are we voting to make the substitute motion the main motion? And so I feel like I understand that better now, but the first time you're like, what is happening right now? Why is that important right now? But it just becomes easier over time. So I definitely would echo that. Go more than once.
Yeah, but my what was it, last year would have been my 8th time or something like that, 8th or 9th. And I was sitting there, very heavily pregnant, because that's what I do at GA, and was sitting in the back, on my computer, typing a couple different things, notes, and I'm listening. I'm like, oh, can't do that. And I'd hear the monitor, and I'd hear, Fred, yeah, you can't do that. Sorry. And then somebody else would come up to the mic and try to make, I'm like, nope, you can't do that one either. And there's this guy sitting in front of me, kind of turned around, like, what is your deal? How come you know this? You're not really supposed to know this.
She's trying to run for moderator, folks.
No, I didn't. I honestly didn't realize I was saying it out loud. It was kind of one of those things where you're talking in your head and you realize, oh, that's actually coming out of my mouth, which happens way too much for my liking. But yeah, it was, you do get a handle on it eventually, but it is very confusing because, if you watch General Assemblies, half the General Assembly is confused at different points.
Yeah, just like take it easy on yourself, because half of the commissioners don't know when to make the motion either. And so it's okay, even if you never get like a whole grasp on Robert's rules, just knowing how they even talk. And sometimes people who don't frequently attend General Assembly tend to get frustrated by certain votes on certain things. And sometimes it's that like the emotional momentum isn't there, and so the vote doesn't go through, and it's kind of like you can witness stuff like that happening even if you don't exactly understand what's going on. But even if you never really quite get it, just knowing what is important to the General Assembly is kind of interesting, and I think it helps you have a certain sense of like peace and understanding that things just take a long time to happen, and that what happens at General Assembly will vary from year to year, and it's not necessarily reflective of what the entire denomination thinks. It's mostly reflective of that, but like, what happens at Presbytery is probably even more important, arguably.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have similar levels of importance, but the General Assembly is just like your, 3-day look into current issues, and they change every year because people's experiences with the outside world change every year. And so the things that people are mad about will also change every year. So it's like The
They will
more I
always be
go,
mad, but it will change.
they will always be mad.
That's right.
It will change. The general thrust of the General Assembly too will also just depend on who is influential that year, who is going, what the speeches are going to be like. The speeches are very interesting, by the way. Like Sarah said, some good, some bad. But there's also something about GA that I hope I've managed to communicate to everybody who asks me why I go, which is that it is really fun. It is
Mhm.
really fun for me because I have a lot of people that I know there, but I think it's just really fun because you get to see the process happening. Whereas normally you just hear about stuff that happens and you just can't be there, but you get to see the process happening. You get to see people that you only see maybe once a year. You get to interact with people from all over the country who are also in PCA churches just like you. And it's just really fun. You end
I
up seeing
mean,
people.
yeah, you and me
Yeah.
we're kind of dweebs. And so we will stand back in the back and geek out about some certain overture that's getting passed and somebody talking about it, But for everybody who's a normal human being who doesn't necessarily get into it as much as we do, or the people who normally listen to this podcast, or the people who produce this podcast, if you're a normal person, then, there's the people make GA. the
Yeah.
the getting together for lunches and dinners and
100%.
hanging out afterwards, and you walk around. I mean, I can't walk 6 feet without running into somebody that I know, or somebody I was like, oh, I haven't seen that person in 3 years, and you're catching up the whole time. And that part is really sweet. And there's a certain, I don't want to call it a responsibility, but I remember the first couple that we went to, and we were absolute nobodies. We didn't know hardly anybody. We knew our friends from seminary, but some of them had been hired, some of them hadn't. Some of them were in tiny churches and they couldn't send. And so, you sort of you had like 8 people that you knew in this general assembly of like 3,000, and so it's very lonely the first couple years. You just kind of hoped that somebody interesting would remember that you existed and invite you to somebody, or that you'd run in on an interesting conversation and be able to sort of squeeze yourself in and be like, I'll just stand and watch this because people are having fun, and I'm just going to watch and have fun vicariously. But, as you develop more relationships, your husband develops more relationships, and then you get to know them as a wife. I've reached this point, something happens in your 30s, and Zoe, you're like still 20 years from this, but something happens in your 30s that where you just feel more settled. You have developed friendships, you've developed relationships, and you're kind of at a nice point. You're not quite as self-conscious. You're not looking to get recognized or noticed. You just like, I'm fine with my little place in the world, and that's okay. And it's at this point that I think a lot of us need to realize, especially the millennial group, we're not the young things at GA anymore. And they're coming in now, and we need to make sure that we're including them in things. And for the young guy that just got ordained and he's at this tiny little country church and he doesn't have a lot of support and he's struggling and the church is hard. I mean, we've been there, and I know how discouraging that is. And General Assembly can be one of those places where you think, maybe I'll go and I'll find some encouragement from a group of like-minded people. And it's kind of our job now to start doing that, start looking for the people who are on the outsides. Don't just go and connect with your same friend group for everything. I mean, that needs to happen because you need that. So, but if you can be that person that just includes, hey, I see so-and-so and so-and-so over there, and they kind of look like they want to be included. And let's just do broad sweeping invitations and make sure that people know that they can, we're just meeting at this place and we're not doing anything. We're just going to be idiots and hang out and have a beer. And that's all that's the whole agenda for like, you know,
It's not
GA
deep.
for
We're
me.
not erudite.
No,
we're not
just
like
gonna talk.
these erudite, you know, like high-minded, whatever. Like we just
might
like
discuss
beer and
a few things, but it's mostly just going to be catching up and what's happening at your church and you know, the latest blow up and are you guys okay? And you know, you're doing really well in ministry, so we're going to ignore you because you're really happy and you don't need attention, and this guy is just struggling. So you know, but I think that's a really important thing that happens from developing relationships outside your bubble, is really getting to know guys that and their wives that are in need of some fellowship and getting to provide that, and just being aware of people besides yourself. I mean, that's kind of Christianity 101, is you mature by, you know, being aware of other people besides yourself. But it happens at General Assembly too.
Yeah. And the other thing, the other side point about how beneficial it is to go to General Assembly is just understanding that the things that your teaching elder husband does and votes on are actually, it's important. It's more important than it actually might look the first time around, but supporting him and supporting the elders in your denomination, it builds up the sense of unity. I think that many people have argued that we need to build up, just having human relationships with people, as well as just supporting them in their work. There's this because I went to GA before I even got married. There's so many jokes about how Seth has to text me before he votes on something. And that's not true, because Seth was already all that when I married him. But so, I mean, it's really not necessary because he's already smarter than me by leaps and bounds and knows how to vote. But just talking about it and the importance of these issues that you're voting on, that things are going to come up and they might seem so tedious and boring, and it seems simple to you, but the fact that people work hard on it, I mean, you can even talk to your husband about, was this even necessary to talk about for 5 hours? And he'll say probably not, but it builds up. You and him can also have a great relationship that's built around sort of evaluating what's going on in your denomination, which, I mean, I don't know, it might just be me, but I find Seth's insights very smart, and I like to talk to him about it.
You know, the definition of maturity, though, is realizing that not everything is just black and white. When you look at an issue and you think, well, it wasn't this simple. And then over the next few years, you think, oh, well, I guess it really wasn't quite that simple. And it's a little bit dismissive or arrogant to say, well, that was simple. Now, some things are. Some things are very plain, and it's ridiculous that it takes so long to get them done. I hold my peace about a few things, but you know, not everything is black and white. And going really demonstrates that. It gets you out of that bandwagoning mentality where this is my side and these are my people.
And everything that they do is right. And I will always agree with them every single time, no matter how much my own opinion might differ on the issue.
Yeah, these are my people, and this is my camp, and everything that my camp does is awesome, and they're right.
It's so convenient to think that way. It's so convenient, but it's not always. But it's not,
and they're going to be wrong about certain things, or you're gonna listen to somebody else's perspective, a floor speech that you didn't think you agreed with, and you're gonna go, huh, that's a really good point. And depending on who you ask, you know, maybe the rest of your friend group or your camp is gonna, oh yeah, whatever. But you're going to dig and ask a few other people and your husband, and you're going to talk about it and think, you know, that was a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. And so you need to go in with your, you know, with your mind open and realize that I think there can be paranoia, whichever side you're on. You know, if you're on the majorly, you know, very, very conservative side, the PCA is always dying. It's always the last year. It's always going to blow up. And if you're on the progressive side, you know, the conservatives, they always seem like they're surprised when we're not ogres. And there's this paranoia of each side that really dissolves when you get to know people in person. And it prevents you from creating this very convenient, very black and white camp that you can just, you know, it's sort of the no spin zone, I guess.
It helps you also to treat things that are being talked about on the merits of the issue rather than
Yes.
like the person who comes from the particular side of the denomination that you're talking about. Sometimes that's fair because that's something that they publicly, sometimes judging an issue by who's supporting it is fair. But it's also important to think about things on the merits. And going to GA, forming human relationships, just viewing what's going on, seeing that this is important work is just something that I think will be helpful as we move forward in the denomination for the unity that I think will be necessary. The PCA has always been, it's been talked about how we have different camps and different sides. And I do a little bit of denominational reporting. And so that is somewhat true in every denomination, but it seems to me like the PCA has a large amount of it that is not characteristic just because of the way that we were formed, and nobody claims that we're monolithic and whatever. That's just part of our origin story. But I think it's good for us to just participate wherever we can, just so that we can build up those bonds and unity and think about things biblically in ways that don't seem to be just, one camp that's crazy attacking another camp that's crazy. It's a very shallow way to look at it, but striving for unity is good. And if you're a wife or you're a family of a pastor, I think it is good for you to just be there as an encouragement too. Even though you can't really vote, I think it's still good. I mean, that's just my personal opinion, but
there are a lot of different activities that you can do. I mean, there's a whole host of women's activities that if you're interested in, whatever itinerary they have each year, you can browse through that and see if there's anything you want to go to. There is different kinds of childcare. You have to sign up rather early for those, I will say. You need to get on the list because those sell out very, very, very early because they only have a limited amount of space. And some of those around COVID, maybe the year after, were not as, there wasn't much available just because of the nature of things. I think it's kind of gotten back to normal.
It seems to be picking back up.
I've never used it. GA has always been like, it's been a really cheap vacation for me and Sean because it's the 1 week of the year where Sean's already got a hotel room. He already has to go to this particular place. He already has to be at this. And then for me to come along too, I mean, I have very few personal expenses. And so I just kind of pay my way and get to, sometimes he's in meetings and different things. And I just kind of walk around and talk to people. I've only ever come with a baby. I've never brought my whole family. There are some people that do that. And they kind of make it into a family vacation. I don't know how you do that because, it just means that mom is tied down to the kids all day. And then, when dad is done at the end of the night, then it's sort of like a family vacation and dad goes back and they do swim in the pool and do different things. We've always treated GA as sort of, let's try to leave the older kids with the grandparents, the once a year that my parents get my kids for 3 to 4 days and have to survive with all of them until we get back. And it's kind of a nice just bonding just with me and my husband. And I'm either pregnant or there's a little one that I can't leave. But there's lots of different things that you can do, lots of different avenues to make it work, depending
the
on
free Covenant College t-shirt is a benefit that Sarah usually, she always manages to get to the Covenant College t-shirts before I can. And so I do not have any of them because I always see somebody that I know or I've seen them on a podcast. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I know that person. I have to go talk to them. And then all the t-shirts are gone. But
dude,
there is some great swag.
All of my grocery lists are swag from GA. All of my Aldi bags are like different years General Assembly tote bags. That's why my Aldi bags are. People are like
the classic tote bag.
Yeah, they're looking at my cart coming out of Aldi like, what in the world is this woman? This is like a cult. What are those things?
The Porsche Club of America has a General Assembly every year. What is that?
No idea. But yeah.
I want the listeners to know that this has been so uncommon. I simply put together a list of questions in our little doc and they just took it from there. This has been wonderful. But we do need to wrap up. And I was going to say what Sarah describes as GA is exactly the way my wife and I do it. It is a little vacation. We've never taken children to GA and we will never take children to GA as long as we have our way about it. GA
will,
is the
but
same
I
week
need to
as
show
grandma
everyone.
camp in our house. That's the way it works.
Mhm.
What do you say, Zoe? You can bring kids along one
I'm
day?
so sorry. I was gonna say I will when I have one, or it's my turn to be pregnant. GA, it is my turn to show everybody my Presbyterian child. So I'm looking forward to that.
The only fun thing about being pregnant at GA it's definitely not the airplane ticket, because you're afraid the plane is going to tilt in the sky with the weight of yourself. But it is that people feel sorry for you, and so then you get to the buffet line sooner. Just saying.
My wife is convinced that in the future, and she probably will bring me around on this, that we are going to find our daughters' husbands by taking them to General Assembly and introducing them to all of our friends' children, which that will convince me to take them, I think.
Oh yeah, there ought to be like
good
some
stock
sort of
at GA.
There ought to be some sort of like your kids have reached the age, teenage age, and so you guys need to just hang out with all of your other teenager friends and develop some friendships there. But
it is time for my daughters to meet the arranged husbands that Steven Spinnenweber and I have set up for them. So
yes,
I will have 2 Spinnenweber daughters in the long run. So it is going to happen.
You and everybody else in the PCA are just vying for that arranged marriage.
Listen, I made him Presbyterian. All right. He is my creation. So nobody else gets him.
Frank and Presby.
That's right. Yeah. Spinnenweber, call me. We need to work out the details, dude. Let's wrap up. I do want to, before we do some sort of like closing, like, final kind of silly questions or quick questions. If anybody's listening and thinking to yourself that these two ladies should have a podcast where they can talk like this a lot together, they actually have a podcast, which you've referenced a couple of times already. Somebody, maybe Sarah, tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, our podcast is under the Presbycast feed. So we are the Presby Girls, which I know is the most original title, but we didn't even get to name it because we're so conservative that we let Brad name our podcast for us. And we just know what we're told. But yeah, we basically
actually did name Presby
You
Girls.
did?
I did.
I thought Brad named it.
So egalitarian of you. Oh,
I ran it by him first. So,
okay.
I mean, still in keeping with egalitarian, I wanted to do, I don't know, I almost did Presby Gals, but then Brad's wife thought that it might not sound the best and Presby Girls would be better. And there's also Theology Gals, so we didn't want to seem like
You're copying anybody.
So yeah, it was a joint effort, but I found the Presby Girls Twitter handle and I was like, this will work. And Brad was like, okay. But anyway, that said, Sarah could tell you about the rest of it, but he did sign off on the name. I've never told anybody that before, but.
Okay. Well, I didn't even realize you were the one behind the name. But anyway, so, so when Zoe and I met in 2021, Brad kind of put us together, and apparently, I thought Zoe was in charge of the podcast. He's like, hey, we should do a podcast. And I said, oh, okay. I thought he was like talking about a one-off thing. Like, okay, we'll have the 2 girls on for an episode. And then about 15 minutes beforehand, he says, no, I'm not going to be on here. You 2 can just talk. I was like, okay, about what? He's like, whatever. You guys are good at that. So I was like, okay. And I thought, well, Zoe's in charge. And Zoe's like, I'm not in charge. And so I almost got tricked into doing this, but then I've enjoyed it so much that I don't really want to complain about it. But we just
talked about how much we like the PCA or something the first episode.
I think Brad just knew, okay, these women are complete dweebs and they can talk, so they'll be great podcast material. But we've had lots of different people on whenever we get around to it. And it's been fun to ask them questions. We don't want to just be a copycat of what the guys are doing and be like, oh, we're not egalitarian, but here's all of the women's opinions on every single minute issue. That's not what we're trying to do. But just some of the topics we're going for more perennial topics rather than the latest controversy, because believe me, there's enough chatter about every single latest controversy du jour every 2 weeks. So we try to have people on to talk about, questions that, all right, I don't know the ins and outs of this, so I'm going to ask stupid questions for everybody else that doesn't know the ins and outs of things. So, I mean, we've done some on, we've had Rosario on a couple times. We've had
that content's fantastic. The Rosario Y'all's stuff
Yeah,
with Rosario is
she
great.
was she
Yeah.
was amazing.
We need to have her on for the third year in a row because her
she's
episodes
kind
are
of
always the
on in
best.
April or May. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
You
We
got to
need do
grab her
that.
at GA and do a lot like a recorded in person episode with her. That's what you should do.
We could do like just those questions where they ask like side on the sidelines of a sports game, like, do you have any pets? Yes, no. What's your favorite color? No, that'd be terrible, actually. We should not do that.
The last one we just did, we had a couple people on talking about different changes of ideas, different changes of opinion. We've done several on men and women's issues, biblical femininity. We had Mary Weller on. She was awesome. And we've interviewed this guy named Sean Morris a couple times, and we've let the mustache in a few times, and the riffraff, and but it's been fun. So we've got a couple more coming up that we're excited about. But yeah, it's very much a hobby thing, and it's very much are all four of my children not screaming? Have I gotten all of my chores done? Do I have dinner ready? Okay, if I complete all of that, then I can do like podcast stuff, because it's very much this comes last. But for the free time that I do have every once in a while, it is fun.
Y'all listen to Presby Girls. You have to subscribe to Presbycast to get it, but you can skip some of those if you want to.
If you just search Presby Girls on YouTube, you will just get rid of all of the chaff and find the nuggets, the good stuff.
Or just follow them on Twitter, and you can just see when they post things. That's probably helpful too. Zoe, you mentioned it earlier that you and your husband are at a church plant that he's pastoring up there, in Idaho somewhere, not far from a certain place. I'm forgetting the name of the town that y'all are in. That's what's happening right now. Tell us about your church plant.
Yes, more than happy to. So my husband and I are at Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. It is the most recent mission church of the Pacific Northwest Presbytery. We live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is it's like heart of the all or something in French. And it was coined because the trappers around here were so this is legend. I don't even know if this is true, but I saw it on the Nextdoor app once, so it might be slightly accurate. But it's like these fur traders were so shrewd with their business dealings that Coeur d'Alene is like the heart of the all, which is related to that somehow. Anyway, no, hey, listen, it's true.
If you can't find it on Wikipedia, Nextdoor is where I go for information. So it's probably
obviously accurate. It's the most. It's the second least reliable news source in the world. It's really fun to be on the Nextdoor app. But the church itself is not in Coeur d'Alene. It's in Post Falls. So it's about like it sounds. And we're meeting in an old church building that used to be a PCUSA church once upon a time. And so we did not lease it from the PCUSA. It's an event center, but they let us use it every Sunday for worship. So we're actually meeting in a physical church building. I do not remember what our fundraising goal is, but frankly, it wouldn't even be necessary for me to tell you, because the Lord has been very kind. A lot of churches have reached out to provide financial support. We haven't reached our goals completely yet, but we are just having a great time. We had a solid core group, and I think this past Sunday we had 94 people in attendance, which is not our largest time. So it's been really good. Fortunately, Seth is a great preacher, and that's what people have been saying. So it's just the word and the sacraments, and it's quite simple. But we're getting to know people better here. We've been here since November. So it's a great project. We're really enjoying it. Seth is an Idaho native. He grew up south of here in Lewiston, Idaho, which is like central Idaho. But he's a native Idahoan, so he's very at ease here. He loves, fishing and all that. So it has been a really great project. We're just hoping that the Lord will grow us and that we'll be able to particularize within a few years here, and that we'll get some good eldership going. But for now, we're just waiting on Seth's transfer into the presbytery, waiting for the Lord to raise up elders, and but yeah, it has been really, really good. So we're enjoying it a lot.
Yeah, I got to smoke a cigar with your husband at Twin Lakes. Sean was probably around smoking a pipe somewhere, but
Did you know that you guys, it may have been Sean, but he put Seth on to a pipe. So Seth got a pipe like
Aw.
right after he came back from Twin Lakes. He ordered it,
Man.
and
That sounds like Sean.
Well,
the
there's
pipe
always next year.
influencer.
We can influence more next year. Yeah. Okay, so last 3 questions for each of you. Quickly. I don't have to tell Scott and Jared that ever, but I'll tell y'all
It's okay. We deserve it.
briefly. Yeah. So 3 questions. First one: what's your favorite General Assembly memory? That comes to mind.
My favorite General Assembly memory is, I have a lot of these, by the way, but one of the funniest things that happened is when John Bice was the ruling elder, who was the moderator that year. And for whatever reason, I think that was 22, we were having so many issues with voting devices. And the IT guy goes, if you raise your voting devices in the air and point it directly at the poll or the location, it'll probably give you an easier time. You'll probably be able to vote. And so John Bice, he has a smile on his face and he raises like his little voting device and he goes, "Heavenward, brothers." And that was a great memory. Just people being jovial about technical issues, which we seem to have every year, but that was a hilarious one.
You got a baby now? I love it.
Yeah, he woke up from his nap.
Awesome.
I think one of my favorite GA memories, and it had really nothing to do with GA, was watching Zoe meet Seth in person for the first time and standing next to her while she was completely freaking out. She's like, "Oh, I see him. There he is. There he is. Oh my goodness. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do?" And I was like, breathe. First breathe. And, that was hilarious. That was lots of different conversations and lots of long night conversations coming together and getting to see the two of them interact and going, all right, this is endgame.
We shook hands over your child.
I know you did. That was fun.
Oh man. What about favorite swag? We've already mentioned a couple things, but are those your favorites, or is there something you miss maybe that they used to have you don't see anymore? We've heard lots of different things when we ask folks about favorite swag.
I did not get it this year, but like there's like a 50th anniversary coin.
Ooh,
did you get the 50th anniversary coin, Sarah? Because
no,
I did not get that.
I did.
I forget about the stuff, the swag, because I get talking to people, and
those were only for the men. Only for the men.
Oh,
yeah.
Classic.
Yeah.
There's clearly some misogyny that we need to deal with in the PCA.
Clearly, yeah, obviously, yeah.
Because we didn't get any coins, so that's really not fair.
As long as I get good pens, then I'm good. That's all. I'm really boring. I'd get talking to people and then I forget to, pick up stuff from the tables. So
the Truth Exchange mints, they were handing out mints. Those were good.
I should let all the listeners know this episode is going to air the Monday of General Assembly week. It's going to be the last in our sort of stacked deck about GA, but there will be Polity Matter swag at General Assembly. We don't have a booth because all 3 of us are busy, of course. But if you find us, we've got something to give you, and we also may be doing some like personal recordings on our phones to collab on like a live type episode thing to release later. So find us. We may ask you why Polity matters and then post it on the internet somewhere in the future, and we'll have stuff to hand you.
That's fun.
Last one. There's stuff people don't think about leading into General Assembly. Any tips for folks headed to GA? Last minute tips as they prepare to go. What should people not forget to do or bring, or I don't know, whatever.
Do not get yourself too hyped up on coffee because you will be sitting for a long time. You need to save the energy that coffee will give you for specific times throughout the day if you want to prolong that. Because especially if you're like me and you're like a rabid like ball of energy during GA, you do not need to be drinking like 3 cups of coffee the morning before you're about to go to the assembly hall, because you will be so just buzzed out of your mind that you will not even have the presence of mind to pay attention to certain things that are going on. And you will just be like freaking out, like, how do I pay attention to all this stuff at once? So yeah, don't drink too much coffee. Just save that for when you're tired and lagging in like the middle of the afternoon. That is my tip.
Yeah, my only tip is comfortable shoes. That's my only tip.
That's great.
Do not wear anything else but comfortable shoes, because you're gonna be doing a pile of walking.
I wore heels last year and I did get several blisters, but I
did
might
that the
still do
first
it
couple
again.
years, and I was like, "Oh, these are so cute." And by the end, I was rather ready to like take them off and hurl them at my enemies. I'm like, I hate these things.
Now that I'm an Idaho girl, I will wear flannel jeans and lumberjack boots to General Assembly.
Yeah, now ministering to the potatoes, you're gonna come looking like a lumberjack now.
And my potato queen crown, that will be there too.
Well, as Scott and Jared would probably say right now as they're listening, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us. If you're interested in learning more about anything that we've talked about, check out the show notes in your podcast player or at politymatters.org. I'll have notes in there about some of these things we've mentioned, the women's events, the children's activities, the informational booklet that's available at the GA website, so you can see what else is going on. As we said, it might be too late to sign up for some of those things, but, you know, as you're listening, GA is right now. So welcome. Our great thanks to Zoe Miller and Sarah Morse for joining us and giving us a new perspective on the PCA General Assembly. Ladies, thank you so much. Now that you've been on Polity Matters, you'll have 8 more people that will know you at General Assembly. So congratulations. And will y'all be at GA in Richmond? I meant to ask. No, Sarah.
I will.
Good. All right. So
Yeah,
be
Miss
sure to look
Sarah.
out for Zoe and say hey to her if you see her. Are you going to be floor clerking again this year?
I am. The number of paper that they're trying to hand out, they're trying to make people shift over to
Yeah.
digital because the cost for printing is actually like astronomical for GA. So, but there are still those guys who electronics are kind of a mystery for them. And just to make that easier, there will be floor clerking still. I do not know how much work it'll be because in 2021 it was a lot of work. But yeah, I'll still be doing that. I just don't know if it'll really like be going on that much.
So be sure to tweet out what area you're clerking in, and we'll retweet. We'll get everybody to do that so we can all come sit in Zoe's area and make sure you have a great floor clerk for GA this year. Listeners, if you've enjoyed the show, as most of you already know, you can follow us on Twitter or Facebook at Polity Matters, and be sure to subscribe in your podcast app of choice. If you've got questions or comments, you can reach out to us at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com. You can find us on our socials. Y'all know how to talk to us. And look out for Sarah and Zoe on there too. They're engaged and fun to listen to and talk to. We thank all of you again for spending time with us. And this is different from what I normally have to say, but until next time, say goodbye, ladies.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Y'all take care.